Let's welcome in Congressman Tim Huleskamp. Welcome back to the show, Republican from Kansas. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Thanks for taking the time. I know it's hectic as could be where you are. All right. So where?
Afternoon.
How are you? Thanks for taking the time. I know it's hectic as could be where you are. All right. So where? And Nancy Pelosi said that you guys, the Republicans in the House, are looking to sabotage any deal. Here comes the rhetoric again. Where do you believe we are right now?
It's pretty interesting. Harry Reid continues to say he has the votes, but he votes for anything right now. And after 2 weeks, the U.S. Senate has not cast one single vote on any plan to open up the government, deal with any provisions of Obamacare, including their own plan. And the president has no plan. I mean, the president has absolutely no circulated ideas. He is just sitting there saying no, no, no. And but we discussed that this morning in the Republican conference, and frankly, our leadership trying to basically give the president about everything he wanted. They don't have the votes for that. Thank goodness. So right now we have passed 16 bills to keep the doors of government open, and the president and Harry Reid have rejected all of those, and but we're still pushing back on Obamacare. So really mixed bag right now, and not a lot of action, just a lot of talk.
All right. Well, of course, as the deadline, ticks nearer, the so-called deadline, the so-called default deadline, which, of course, may or may not be accurate. But that aside, I've just been told by our congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Susan Ferricchio, that what she has heard, and she did it with the caveat that it could change any second, but what she has heard is that the House bill looks like this: debt ceiling increase until February, a government reopen until December 15th, the medical device tax issue gone, but congressional staffers and some White House employees would lose their subsidies, and there'd be no exemption for a tax that union members had to pay. That exemption would be gone, and they would have to pay. Does that sound? And there'd be no exemption for a tax that union members had to pay. That exemption
moments ago, and that would include all those provisions. I'm not sure what the actual language says, but that's the summary of those. And but we do a little bit about Obamacare. But gosh darn it, I'm worried about continuing to let Obamacare sign up people between now and December 15th. The original proposal from our House leadership this morning was, well, let's go to next year so we can start the Medicaid payments to basically the blue states, and that was a bad idea, rejected by the conference. I'll have to digest what's going on here, but we have to continue to focus on the fact that the House leadership oftentimes, and certainly all the Senate, or most of the Senate and the President, they're status quo. They do not want to make any changes. They want a $700 billion deficit and continuing to implement Obamacare. That's completely unacceptable.
Well, Congressman, let me focus on the first part of what you said there, the House leadership. And this bill, would you be, I know you have to read it, but if everything is in it basically that I just said, and there's nothing more, nothing less, would that be acceptable to you? And part two, so let's say you guys pass that. Let's say, yeah, we'll bite the bullet. We're going to do it. And then Harry Reid says, no, clean. It's got to be clean. None of this stuff. Then what do you guys do? So part one and part two. Go ahead.
Great question. I am unable to say yet what's in there. One thing we did discuss in conference this morning is a pretty broad issue. We're sitting here talking about Obamacare subsidies for members of Congress. Let's do away with those. Let's put Kathleen Sebelius on the exchange. Heck, put the president on there too, and that makes sense. But we have this ongoing issue of 77 lawsuits about the religious liberty aspect. We begged our leadership this morning, put something in there. I have to look through and see if that's in there. I don't see that necessarily. That is something I don't think they can pass it without that. We'll look a little more closely on that.
All right, let me interrupt only for time constraints here, and I just want to get this answer out of you. I think it's very important.
Yes.
What does John Boehner do? If he sees, you guys pass this or don't, and it's sent to Harry Reid if it's passed, and he says no, does John Boehner acquiesce? Does he put something much less than you could ever vote for, much less than the conservative members of your party and caucus could ever vote for? Does he bring that to, because he's talked about default, that it's unacceptable, it can't happen. Does he bring something to the floor that he knows could pass with Democrats and Republicans, even though it would tick off you guys and the conservatives? Does he do that, and would that put his speakership at risk?
I think that's probably what he would do. And but the calculation this morning was that Harry Reid had the votes lined up. It's Harry Reid and the president, and Pelosi against basically the House conservatives. Sometimes the leadership with us, and sometimes not. But potentially that's where we end up. I think certainly you've got a Senate surrender caucus. You've got no help from John McCain and those folks over there. They're piling the heat on House conservatives, and we're trying to grab something out of the fire before they fully implement Obamacare. And this is a small part of that. But if this goes down, I think our leadership fully expects to cave and surrender and declare a strategic retreat again. And let Obamacare fully ramp up.
And what would that mean, in your opinion, or to you personally, for the leadership of John Boehner? Would it be in jeopardy?
Well, you're talking to a congressman that didn't support him this past January.
So you would know. So you might know how many people are dissatisfied. So that's probably why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I don't know how others would react to that. Would they? I don't see him replacing the speaker. I mean, the power in the speakership and other leadership has to do with a lot of campaign finances for many of my colleagues. Sometimes they are not willing to challenge Washington because that's where they raise their money, and that's obviously as well why they're so worried about Secretary Lou's claim on the debt ceiling, because Wall Street told them to be worried. But as of now, that's an imaginary date that's kind of being moved back. But the push to get something done by Thursday, I think the pressure's coming out of those tires, and hopefully we can continue to put some pressure instead on the White House. Say, hey, negotiate, come to the table, Mr. President, and this is what this plan is designed to do. But until I sit down and pour through that
right.
and judge the Senate, it's hard to say what will happen. But nobody's job is in jeopardy. But my gosh, let's hope at a minimum Obamacare would have to cover who it's supposed to cover, which would include members of Congress and our staff. That's what the law says.
So you don't put it beyond Boehner when push comes to shove. If the White House and Reid don't budge to cave, quote unquote, but you don't think that would affect his speakership?
I don't think so, because a lot of folks again are unwilling to challenge the status quo, especially if it's their own establishment. But a lot of folks stood up in Williamsburg and threatened they do exactly that.
Would anybody challenge him, though? I mean, would you challenge him?
I certainly wouldn't be running for anything. That's unusual. I mean, but I'll just say the class of '94 seems to have had a lot more guts and gusto than the class of 2010, because they were willing to take down a Speaker Gingrich. But I don't see that happening anytime soon in today's Congress.
Congressman, thank you for taking the time, for being so forthcoming, and for coming back, and we'll speak to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.